They thought pain would slow you down, that it would crack you, reshape you into something softer, weaker, predictable, funny. Because while they were busy watching for your breakdown, you were busy upgrading your response. See, most people feel pain. You process it. Faster than it arrives, sharper than it lands. You don't sit there asking, "Why me?" anymore. You ask, "What's next?" And that's what scares them. Because pain used to be the weapon they relied on. Now it's just your training ground. Every hit, every betrayal, every silent night where it felt like the world was pressing down on your chest. It didn't break you. It calibrated you. Now you don't flinch. You don't freeze. You don't fall apart. You adapt instantly. Like your mind made a deal with chaos itself. Throw whatever you want. I'll turn it into fuel before it even touches me. That's not normal. That's evolution. So if they're still waiting to see you shatter, they're about to be very, very disappointed. Because you don't break anymore. You adjust. You learn. You become something pain can't keep up with. And that's where the real game begins. Pain used to arrive like a warning sign, something loud and overwhelming that demanded attention and forced hesitation. It carried weight, emotion, confusion, and sometimes even fear. Most people still treat it that way, as a signal to stop, to retreat, to question themselves. But something shifted inside you. Instead of reacting to pain like an emotional storm, you started observing it like information. Not something to drown in, but something to decode. Every uncomfortable moment now holds patterns. Every failure carries instruction. Every betrayal exposes a truth that wasn't visible before. What once felt personal begins to feel purposeful. The sting is still there, but it doesn't control the narrative anymore. You don't ask why it hurts. You examine how it works. You break it down piece by piece, like a system that can be understood, studied, and ultimately used. There's a difference between feeling pain and being ruled by it. That difference is awareness. When pain becomes data, it loses its authority. It becomes neutral, almost mechanical. You start to notice how quickly your mind can shift from reaction to analysis. Instead of spiraling, you scan. Instead of collapsing, you calculate. The emotional charge fades faster because you're not feeding it. You're studying it. Patterns begin to repeat, but now you recognize them. The same type of disappointment, the same kind of pressure, the same emotional triggers. But they don't catch you off guard anymore. You've seen this before. And because you've seen it, you already know how it plays out. That familiarity gives you control. You're no longer inside the pain. You're observing it from above, like it's just another scenario running its course. What used to feel like damage starts to feel like feedback. Something went wrong? Good. That means there's something to extract, something to refine, something to improve. The more it hurts, the more there is to learn. Not in a dramatic, emotional way, but in a precise, almost surgical way. You isolate the cause, identify the weakness, and adjust the system. There's no rush to escape it anymore. No panic. Just a quiet focus. You let it pass through you while you take what you need from it. That's what makes it powerful. Pain doesn't last as long when you don't resist it. When you treat it like a message instead of a threat, it stops trying to control you. Your thinking becomes sharper, cleaner, less cluttered with emotion. You stop making decisions based on how something feels in the moment and start making them based on what the situation actually requires. That shift alone changes everything. Because now, even in discomfort, you're still in control. People around you might still react the old way. They get overwhelmed, frustrated, emotional. They see pain as something to avoid at all costs. But you've stepped into a different mindset. One where pain is expected, even useful. Not because you enjoy it, but because you understand it. There's a quiet confidence that comes with that understanding, a sense that no matter what hits you, there's always something to gain from it. You don't fear the impact anymore. You're already thinking about the outcome, already adjusting, already learning, already moving. And over time, that changes how you experience everything. Challenges don't feel like threats. Pressure doesn't feel like danger. It all starts to feel like part of a process, a system that you're constantly improving, constantly refining. Pain doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It becomes something lighter, something manageable, something that works for you instead of against you. That's the moment everything shifts, when pain stops being something that controls your state and starts becoming something that sharpens your edge. Most people live inside reaction. Something happens and they immediately become it. Anger shows up and they become anger. Pressure rises and they become pressure. A mistake happens and suddenly their whole identity bends around that mistake. It's instant, almost automatic, like they never learned there was another option between stimulus and response. That gap never gets used. It stays empty. And in that emptiness, reaction takes control. Fast, emotional, unfiltered reaction. But something changes when you stop living there. When you start noticing that reaction is not intelligence, it's just speed without direction. Anyone can react. That's the easiest thing a mind can do. Something hits you and your system fires back instantly. No structure, no strategy, just reflex. And for a while, that feels like power. People think reacting fast means being strong, but reaction is predictable. It's programmable. If someone knows what triggers you, they don't even need to fight you. They just press the button and watch you move yourself. Rapid adaptation is different. It doesn't just answer the moment. It reshapes it. There's a pause that no one notices. Not hesitation, not fear, but processing. In that fraction of time, something breaks inside the old pattern. The emotional impulse still appears, but it doesn't get to decide anything anymore. It gets observed, translated, redirected. Instead of exploding outward, it gets converted into structure. Information instead of impulse. Direction instead of discharge. This is where things start to separate. People who react stay inside the event. They live inside what just happened. They repeat it, talk about it, relive it, emotionally loop through it until it defines them. But adaptation steps outside the event while it's still happening. It doesn't wait for distance or time to create clarity. It builds clarity inside the chaos itself. While everything is still moving, still unclear, still emotionally loud, the adaptive mind is already reorganizing it into something usable. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Because that question keeps you frozen inside reaction. Instead, the focus shifts to structure. What is this moment doing? What does it change? What does it expose? Every situation becomes a live system update. Something breaks, something reveals itself, something shifts position. You're no longer trapped in the emotional surface of events. You're reading their internal mechanics while they unfold. And the strange part is, the more you practice this, the less dramatic everything becomes. Things that used to shake you barely register the same way. Not because you feel less, but because your processing speed has changed. Emotion still exists, but it doesn't dominate the timeline anymore. It passes through faster because it's being decoded in real time. Nothing sits long enough to become chaos, because chaos requires delay, and you've removed delay from your response system. Even conflict changes shape. Where others see attack, you see structure. Where others see disrespect, you see data about behavior patterns. Where others collapse into reaction loops, you're already adjusting position internally. Not avoiding, not escaping, just transforming input into response before it becomes emotional noise. That's why people start to misread you. They expect the old version of you to appear, the reactive version, but there's nothing to trigger in the same way anymore. It creates distance. Not physical distance, but cognitive distance. You're in the same environment, same conversation, same pressure, but operating on a different layer. One layer is reacting, the other is adapting. One is stuck inside the moment, the other is rewriting it while it unfolds. And because adaptation is quiet, it looks like nothing is happening from the outside. No emotional spill, no visible struggle, just controlled movement through changing conditions without needing to announce anything about it. Over time, your internal system stops treating events as threats and starts treating them as input streams. Everything becomes something to integrate, even disruption, even loss, even confusion. Nothing is wasted in reaction anymore, because nothing is allowed to stop at reaction. It all gets converted, filtered, redirected into the next adjustment, the next move, the next internal recalibration that keeps building on itself without needing permission from emotion to proceed. Further emotional control is not what most people think it is. It's not suppression, it's not pretending nothing is happening, and it's definitely not acting like you're unaffected. That's just performance. Real control starts much deeper, in the space where reaction is born, but never allowed to fully leave its source. Most people live at the surface of their emotions. Something happens, and it immediately becomes visible on their face, in their voice, in their decisions. They don't filter anything. They don't delay anything. They don't reshape anything. It all comes out exactly as it enters. That's not honesty. That's lack of control. When you start developing real emotional control, something subtle changes first. There's a gap. A small pause between what you feel and what you do with it. That gap is everything. In that space, emotions stop being commands and start becoming signals. Anger doesn't tell you to attack. It tells you something matters. Sadness doesn't pull you downward. It informs you of loss or value. Stress doesn't crush you. It highlights pressure points in your system. The emotion still exists, but its authority is gone. It becomes information instead of instruction. And that's where the hidden weapon is formed. Because while everyone else is being moved by their emotions, you're observing yours. Not disconnecting from them, not avoiding them, but seeing them clearly enough that they can't manipulate your next move. That clarity creates distance. And in that distance, power starts to build quietly. No one sees it happening because from the outside, you still look calm, still look unchanged, still look like nothing is affecting you the same way. But internally, everything is being processed at a different level. Emotional control is not silence. It's precision. It's choosing what deserves expression and what deserves transformation. A reactive mind leaks energy in every direction. It burns itself out by constantly turning feeling into immediate action. But a controlled mind redirects that energy. It holds it long enough to understand it, and once it is understood, it can be used. That's the shift most people never make. They think control means holding back. In reality, control means converting. Even pressure starts to behave differently when it cannot trigger immediate reaction. Instead of pushing you into chaos, it becomes structured tension. Something you can stand inside without breaking apart. You stop seeing emotional intensity as danger and start seeing it as raw material. The stronger the emotion, the more usable energy it contains once it is stabilized. That's why controlled individuals don't collapse under pressure the same way others do. They are not resisting it. They are processing it. There is also something unsettling about someone who does not react on cue. People expect emotional predictability. They expect anger to lead to explosion, pain to lead to breakdown, frustration to lead to loss of control. When that pattern doesn't happen, it creates confusion. And in that confusion, your position becomes harder to read. You are no longer operating on the same visible system. Your responses stop matching expectations. That unpredictability is not chaos. It is discipline disguised as stillness. Over time, emotional control becomes less about effort and more about identity. You stop needing to remind yourself not to react because reaction simply stops being the default setting. The mind learns a different rhythm. Feel, observe, translate, decide. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is wasted. Even intense moments begin to slow down internally, not because the world changes speed, but because your processing expands. You start noticing details inside emotions that most people never even register. The early formation of anger before it becomes rage. The first layer of sadness before it becomes collapse. The initial spark of stress before it becomes overwhelm. And in recognizing those early signals, you gain access to intervention points that most people completely miss. This is where emotional control becomes something more than stability. It becomes strategy. Because once you can see emotions forming, you can influence how they develop. You are no longer just responding to what you feel. You are shaping how what you feel is allowed to exist inside your system. That level of internal management creates a kind of quiet dominance over situations that rely on emotional disruption. Nothing gets to fully take over because nothing arrives unfiltered anymore. Everything passes through a layer of awareness first, refined, adjusted, redirected before it ever becomes action, or decision, or expression. And even in the most chaotic environments, there is still that internal space holding everything in place while it all tries to move at once, and nothing ever fully breaks through that line, because the line itself keeps shifting, adapting, recalibrating in real time without needing to announce itself or defend itself, or even explain itself to anything around it, just constant silent adjustment happening underneath everything else while emotions rise and fall and rise again, but never fully escaping into control anymore, because control is already sitting deeper than where they can reach till expanding further into the space where reactions used to live but no longer exist the same, no longer exist the same way anymore. Setbacks used to feel like stopping points. Like something closed, something lost, something that took you off track and forced you into uncertainty. Most people still live inside that interpretation. When something goes wrong, they immediately assign it meaning like it's the end of a sequence, instead of just one movement inside a larger system. They stop at the impact instead of looking beyond it, and in that stopping, they create delay, emotional weight, and hesitation that stretches far longer than the actual event itself. But when your mindset shifts into strategy instead of emotion, setbacks stop being endings and start becoming extraction points. Nothing is just bad anymore. Everything becomes layered. There is always something underneath the surface of failure that is more valuable than the failure itself. Most people never reach that layer because they are too busy reacting to the surface. They experience the hit, and the hit becomes the story. But when reaction slows down and observation takes over, the story changes completely. The hit is no longer the focus. The structure inside the hit becomes the focus. Every setback carries information. Not emotional comfort, not validation, not sympathy. Information. Something broke, something didn't align, something wasn't strong enough. Something wasn't timed correctly. Something wasn't understood fully. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? The focus shifts into, what does this reveal about the system I'm building? That shift alone removes the emotional weight and replaces it with analytical clarity. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of the moment and start seeing yourself as a designer of outcomes who just received a flawed result to refine. This is where conversion begins. Not emotional recovery, but structural improvement. You take what failed and break it into components. What part of this was predictable? What part was avoidable? What part was outside control, but still useful to understand? Suddenly, the setback stops being one solid negative experience and becomes a collection of smaller insights. And those insights are reusable. They don't stay in the past. They move forward with you as upgrades to your decision-making system. Most people repeat setbacks because they never decode them. They feel it, they survive it, they move on from it, but they never extract anything from it. So the same structure appears again later in a different form, and it hits them again in the same way. It's not random. It's repetition without learning. But when you start extracting meaning from every failure, repetition loses its power. The same pattern cannot trap you twice if you already understand its internal mechanics. Setbacks also reveal timing. They expose where speed was misused or where patience was missing. They show whether a decision was rushed or delayed too long. They highlight gaps that confidence alone cannot cover. And once you see that clearly, you stop treating mistakes as emotional damage and start treating them as calibration points. Each one adjusts your internal accuracy. Each one improves your future positioning. Each one removes another layer of guesswork from your system. Over time, something interesting happens. Setbacks stop carrying emotional shock value. They still occur, but they don't destabilize the same way. There is a shorter distance between impact and understanding. What used to take days of emotional processing now takes moments of structural recognition. You absorb the situation faster because you are not resisting it anymore. You are decoding it immediately while it is still fresh, still active, still forming its final shape. And because of that, momentum is no longer easily broken. A setback no longer resets your progress. It redirects it. It adjusts the path instead of erasing it. You don't lose time in the same way because you are not stopping to emotionally process what could have been avoided. You are extracting what can still be used. Even disappointment becomes usable material because it highlights expectations that need recalibration. There is also a psychological shift that happens quietly in the background. Confidence stops being based on outcomes and starts being based on adaptability. You no longer trust yourself because everything went right. You trust yourself because even when things go wrong, you know how to extract direction from it. That kind of trust is deeper. It is not fragile. It does not depend on constant success. It is built on recovery speed, on interpretation speed, on the ability to turn disruption into structure without losing internal stability. And once that becomes your default way of processing experience, setbacks lose their identity as obstacles. They become part of the system itself. Not interruptions, but adjustments. Not failures, but feedback loops that refine the next version of your decisions before they even fully form, continuously shaping direction through correction instead of reaction, so nothing ever truly stops progress anymore. It only changes its form and keeps moving forward through whatever structure is built next from what was just learned without needing anything to be perfect in the first place to still keep evolving in real time. Chaos is not rare. It's constant. It doesn't wait for permission, it doesn't announce itself, and it doesn't care whether you're ready or not. It arrives in patterns, in people, in timing, in silence, in sudden noise, in situations that don't make sense until after they already hit. Most people experience chaos like an interruption, something that breaks their rhythm, disturbs their peace, and forces them into confusion. And in that confusion, they slow down. They hesitate. They try to make sense of something that was never designed to be stable in the first place. But there is another way of existing inside it. Not resisting chaos, not fearing it, not even trying to control it, but evolving faster than it can leave damage behind. That changes everything. because chaos only works when it has time to settle. It needs delay. It needs emotional processing time. It needs you to pause long enough for confusion to turn into collapse. If that delay disappears, chaos loses its advantage. When your internal system starts adapting faster than events can destabilize it, something strange happens. The impact still arrives, but it doesn't fully land the same way. It passes through layers of understanding almost immediately. Instead of hitting identity, it gets processed as structure. Instead of becoming emotional overload, it becomes input. Instead of turning into breakdown, it turns into adjustment. And the speed of that transformation is everything. Evolution in this sense is not slow growth over time. It is rapid recalibration inside pressure. Every moment of instability becomes a signal that something inside your system can be optimized. You stop asking for calm environments to function. You start building internal environments that remain stable regardless of external conditions. That's a different level of adaptation. It's not about avoiding chaos. It's about becoming uncatchable by it. Chaos tries to create fragmentation. It tries to split attention, scatter focus, distort perception, and overload emotional response. But when your processing speed exceeds the speed of disruption, fragmentation never completes. It starts, but it doesn't finish. You recognize the pattern early, and instead of being pulled into it, you reorganize it while it is still forming. That prevents full collapse, because collapse requires time to develop. This is where most people underestimate themselves. They think damage happens instantly, but most damage is delayed reaction. It happens after interpretation, after internal narration, after emotional amplification. If you interrupt that chain early enough, damage never fully forms. You still feel the initial impact, but it doesn't get permission to expand. It stays contained at the surface level of awareness instead of spreading into identity. Over time, something shifts in perception itself. Events stop looking like threats and start looking like dynamic inputs. A problem is no longer a stopping point. It is a data spike. A conflict is not a destabilizer. It is a structural reveal. A failure is not a collapse. It is a recalibration trigger. Everything that used to slow you down becomes something that accelerates understanding instead. And as this continues, your nervous system stops treating unpredictability as danger. It starts treating it as normal operating conditions. That is a critical shift, because most people require predictability to feel safe. But adaptability requires exposure to unpredictability without collapse. When that exposure becomes familiar, chaos loses emotional dominance. It can still occur, but it no longer defines internal state. There is also a strange clarity that develops when adaptation becomes faster than disruption. You begin to see ahead of emotional reactions. Not in a predictive sense, but in a structural sense. You recognize where something is going before it fully unfolds because you've seen similar patterns before. And instead of waiting for confirmation, you adjust immediately. That removes hesitation loops. That removes emotional delay cycles. That removes most of the space where chaos usually grows. People around you may still experience the same events differently. Where they see sudden instability, you see predictable structure forming under pressure. Where they see overwhelm, you see systems temporarily overloaded, but still readable. Where they see endings, you see transitions still in motion. The difference is not in what is happening, but in how fast it is being processed internally. And the faster that processing becomes, the less damage can accumulate. Not because nothing affects you, but because nothing stays unprocessed long enough to become damage in the first place. Everything is being rewritten internally at the speed of exposure, adjusted before it settles. Restructured before it defines anything permanent, continuously shifting form under awareness, that never allows chaos to fully stabilize into something that can hold weight against you, always moving slightly ahead of the moment itself, and never allowing the moment to fully catch up to the version of you that is already changing again and again and again, without pause, without resistance, without ever staying in one place itself to you, because by the time it tries to settle, you are already somewhere else, shift mentally, structurally, internally, already beyond the brain. Slowly the next 44 right after absolutely form young. But it's always going to the next as continue to move forward and so on forward and follow more.